Hello, hello. We are live, and I have got the man, the myth, the legend, Alex Winter, president of Hakes Auctions, is joining us tonight. Alex, what's going on?
Hey, feeling good. Thank you for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. No, it's great to meet you. I'm a huge fan of Hakes Auctions. Just the variety that you guys have. I collect all the different 80s, 90s nostalgia type stuff. So you guys kind of hit all the markers. We're going to get into a few different topics, guys. We're going to try to answer questions as well. We'll mix it in, but we'll also kind of talk to Alex, get to know him better, and we'll try to mix those in. We've got a few items we'll look at a little bit later on in the stream. All right, so Alex, I guess the obvious kind of first question is, how did you get started collecting and collectibles? What got you going?
I was born. I was actually born in 1969, so tremendous year for pop culture, moon landing, Woodstock. And from a young child, I had a mother who instilled in me to keep things in good condition, keep the boxes, keep the packaging. So sort of born a collector, and then that got me into the condition aspect of things and taking care of things. And my first collectible love was comic books. Okay. So, but that was sort of hand me down. I remember having a stack of comics that was there, and I would read those, and so that's sort of late 70s. 1980 is the year that changed my life in two ways, and that's comics and I have to go every week to the comic book store, and music. So in 1980, New Teen Titans #1 came out. And yes. I was in a store called Bookland, which here in Pennsylvania was Borders before Borders. And they had a huge comic book section. But this was #1 collector's item. And something clicked in me and said, I've got to come back every month for this comic book. Well, that turned into this title and that title. And before you know it, I'm buying, or having my grandparents at the time buy me a lot of comic books. Also 1980, AC/DC's Back in Black comes out.
Oh, yeah.
But I'd been a fan of music. My parents always had the radio on, but I wasn't buying anything. I was a fan of Kiss in the late 70s because my aunt was a fan, but that was, again, more the comic book aspect of these guys look like superheroes. I couldn't tell you their songs. I didn't have any albums. So again, though, flash forward to 1980, Back in Black, I have older friends talking about it, and I get it within a couple months of its release. And I go down a rabbit hole of music that now has me 12,000 albums deep. So,
wow. And
comic books was the same obsession. So those two events in 1980 really set me down the path. But as I'm acquiring this stuff, I also have a next door neighbor who is a collector, tokens, mason jars, lead soldiers, and he has case upon case of collectibles. It's like you're seeing here, cases of things. It was like walking into a museum, and that also clicked to me. So all of these things are happening at one time. And this person has Sunday meetings on their front porch of local dealers and collectors who would go to flea markets and co-ops and all of this. And then Sundays they meet up and talk about all of their finds of the day. And this was a connected house. And so I'm sitting on the porch just absorbing all of this and finding it very interesting and fascinating. And so one of the people there his name was Dick Stegemeyer, and he happened to be a dealer at local flea markets and so forth, and was looking for someone to help him out. And as I'm getting into collecting the comic books and so forth, hey, let me do this. This sounds like fun. But from that, then I start to, so as he's going around and buying things to resell, now I'm seeing a Batman lunchbox and a Superman board game and all these things that are related to the comic books that I love. And it just seems a natural progression. I start buying that stuff. So now a superhero collection started, along with a comic book collection, along with a music collection. And this person happened to be the shipper at Hakes. Oh, so wow. That transitions into, he gets me a job at Hakes. And once I'm exposed to that, as you mentioned, all the different things that we offer, we've always been about that. I mean, there's very little that we haven't offered over the years. And so I'm seeing all of this stuff. And now I start collecting pinback buttons, and I start collecting comic book art, and I start collecting sports cards, and I start collecting autographs, and on and on and on. It was just, I was open up to a world that I didn't know existed. And at that time was kind of in its infancy compared to what it is now, where collectibles are on every channel that you turn on, every paper you pick up, there's a new record price. But it wasn't like that back then. So that, in a nutshell, sort of my formation of a collector, and it has not slowed down at all. As you can see, this is overflow in my office, doesn't fit at home. So,
wow, it's pretty incredible, because from what you're saying, you entered in even before kind of the pop culture boom. When you think about the 80s, really was I mean, you have the Star Wars figures and the Masters of the Universe and the Thundercats and all that stuff, and all the pop culture things that came, to be in the 80s and 90s. And you started at Hakes, and it sounds like you never left.
Right. Yeah. So in 1985, actually I should say 1984, I was 15, and I had a day off from school, and I had helped Deke out, and he said, "Hey, this kid's okay." So he talks to Ted Hake, the founder of Hakes Auctions, and says, "Let's give this guy a try. I could use some help in the shipping department." So I did that for one day. That worked out. And Ted said, and I think I did a couple other under the table things throughout the next half year or so. But Ted said, "When you turn 16, come and see me." So I turned 16, 1985. I went and saw him. And 38 years later, here I am. So shipping assistant, I started to pick up on all the different things that we sold. So then I started helping him put the auctions together. I did photography. I did describing. That sort of transitioned into me doing a little bit of every aspect of the job, including them putting the auctions together themselves. At that time, I should go back to when we started, I guess. Hake started in 1967, America's first collectibles auction house, founded by Ted Hake. And that was political pinback buttons is how it all started. And he was a collector of that material, and said, if I like it, other people are going to like it, and let's turn this into a business. So at that time, he would acquire a number of items and then put out, if anybody even knows what I'm saying, but a mimeograph sheet of price.
I don't know what that is.
So like a precursor to a photocopy, right?
Okay.
And so this list would be just text, 50 political pins, priced at 50 cents, $1, $2, whatever it was back then. And he would send that out across the country, and people would order off of that list. And what he found out very quickly is it hit the East Coast first, because that's where we're established. By the time the West Coast got it, everything was sold out. So very early on, he said, that's not fair. How do we do this? Auction. So that's how the auction platform started for us. But along the way, he came across comic character items and Disney items, sports items, and said, well, if I have an audience for X, do I have one for Y and Z? And the answer was a resounding yes. So then over the years, it just, as more things were discovered, he started to offer more and more. So flash forward to me in 1985. And then right beyond that, that's when I started to help him put all this together in an auction context, but of our material. At that point, 98% of what we sold, Ted owned. So it wasn't a consignment basis. He owned it.
Okay.
And so as I learned, he was putting every section together. But as I learned more about different types of collectibles, and he said, well, go ahead and do the G.I. Joe section, right? Go ahead and do the Batman section. He stuck with political, though, because that was never my thing. I never gravitated towards that. But so it's at one point then I'm shooting, describing, putting the catalog together, really absorbing all of this. And so that lasted up until 2004 is when he sold the company to Steve Jeppy.
Okay.
And so Steve Jeppy of Diamond Comic Distributors, Jeppy Family Enterprises, there's E. Gerber and Alliance Games and Diamond Select Toys and Baltimore Magazine and Gemstone Publishing. So now we go from being just an auction house of collectibles to a family of companies of all related to collectibles. And so as that transition happened, I went from cataloger to merchandise manager to production manager to general manager to now president. So that's in a nutshell the 38 years so far journey of me from 1985 till now at Hakes.
Wow. So, and when did you become president?
7 years ago, I think, in that ballpark. But back to your point about the 80s toys and things. So yes, in 1985, the first year I started there, that's the first year we offered vintage Star Wars. So, not to brag, but you want to talk about being ahead of the curve.
Oh,
Nobody
man,
thought
way
about
ahead
offering,
of the curve. Way ahead.
Yeah. So, and it started with, some of the Topps cards and some of the first series figures and things. But again, we had collectors right away. So then into the late 80s and certainly into the 90s, we start ramping up what we're offering in Star Wars. Nowhere near what we now do today with the AFA graded action figures and so forth. It is, you want to talk about a boom from the last 5 years or so. Star Wars has exploded in a good way. And that is certainly a big part of our auctions now. But in 1985, it was 2 items out of 3,200.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. And were they all, were they still in box the same way they're sold today, but graded, or was it a lot of loose stuff at that point as well?
No, not loose. No, we were lucky to very early on fall into a couple collections of people who bought new off of the rack and saved it. Yeah, I remember Star Wars was an anomaly at that point of as many adults liked it as kids. And as many adults were buying the product as kids because they liked it, but instead of playing with it, they put it away. So that's why you see so much men in boxing on card Star Wars now, because it was safe.
Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. I was born in 81, so I was, 8, 9, 10 years old when that stuff was being played with. I didn't realize that adults were saving it or, kind of hoarding it, keeping it away like that in packaging. That's interesting.
Yeah. And not for any kind of monetary thing, just because they liked it. But that's why there's so much out there that it was saved. And then there's other things too. There have been case finds at stores and so forth. It wasn't all saved by adults, but that film just had a big impact on everyone. So it was, 2 audiences buying, and Lucas certainly wasn't telling them to stop. Right.
Right. Yeah. No kidding. So now your personal collection, it looks like I can see behind you, it looks similar to mine where you've got just a whole variety of different things, but I know you had mentioned a lot of records and do you have kind of primary things that really make up most of it, or is it pretty, diverse these days?
It's still very diverse, but diverse as in I could have 2 items of one thing. And as far as my music goes, between records, CDs, 8 tracks, reel to reel, cassettes, I'm 12,000 plus albums. The subgenres of that, I really like signed vinyl. So I buy a lot of band signed records, or I take records to get signed by bands. And I also do a lot of soundtracks signed by the actors and directors and so on and so forth. Comic books I still have. I've kind of cooled off on that a little bit. Original art, though, I have a lot of that around that. I sort of gravitate from comic books to comic book art. I've got little collections of pinback buttons with attachments. So things from the early 1900s to the 1950s that, like we have one in this auction, Detroit Tigers pinback that has a celluloid tiger attached to it. So I like something, a little extra that's attached to celluloid pinback buttons. But, again, just I've got a collection of 1930s bisque skulls. I'm a fan of pool billiards, so I have vintage, billiard-related things, cigarette lighters, advertising signs. I like pinup stuff, so I have some Vargas and Olivia and things of that nature, calendars and so forth. I'm a big video game fan, as you can see my unit back there. So I started on the Atari 2600, so I've got things related to that video game system. And then just random knickknacks, for lack of a better word, that I like, that I see. And, you can't see, but hiding back in there is a little celluloid match safe, early 1900s from Salem. Massachusetts with a witch on it. I like Halloween stuff, but I have very few pieces. But that's something I like. So again, my primary collections are there. But if I see something that appeals to me, I don't really care what it is. I'll add it to this collection.
I was going to ask you about just kind of your thoughts over the collectibles boom over the last 5 years, but let's hold on that, because actually, as you were talking, I thought about another question for you, just because you've been in it really. I mean, going back to really the birth of mass-produced pop culture, let's just call it that, because I understand there was pop culture items going back to the 50s, but if we're talking about really highly focused merchandise like G.I. Joe and Star Wars Kenner and that sort of thing, we're really like late 70s to now. What is your opinion on third-party grading when we talk about these items, whether it be AFA or PSA or SGC or any of these companies? How much of I guess what's just your take on third-party grading? And did you gravitate towards it when it came out, or were you kind of like, that's just is that a gimmick? When it first came out, like how did you embrace it, or did you want to wait on it? What was your thoughts?
I wouldn't say I embraced it, because the things that I really collected at that time weren't being graded. So I was a card fan. I should go back a little bit and say also when I had that stack of comics, I did go to the store and buy sports cards and non-sports cards. So I had collections of those as well, trying to assemble sets, and that stuck with me to the early 90s. And then when that first card craze happened, where there was so much product, I got fed up and left. But I'm always a card fan, basketball primarily. But even at that time, late 80s, early 90s, it was coins that were being graded and not much else. And comics didn't come until the early 2000s. Action figures didn't come till the early 2000s. So no, that world didn't impact me or Hakes in general, because again, so much of what we had wasn't graded. Now, flash forward to the early 2000s, and yes, we were one of the first to offer graded comic books through CDC. And then as other things got graded, we offered them because our customers asked for that, right? My opinion of it is I like it from the standpoint of, again, going back to that little kid that saved his packaging. Here you got something that's going to lock in place the condition. So now you can handle it and you don't have to worry about damaging it. At the same time, it does add value. So as an auction house, and we're trying to get the most we can for a consignor, then we have to factor that in too, and decide. And we do that on a daily basis. Cards, comics, action figures, now video games, video cassettes, all of this. When we get a collection in, the consignor relies on us to say, it's worth putting money into this because it will bring more. It's not worth putting money into this because it's still only going to be worth this much. So I think it's important for the industry on several levels. Just don't get hung up on that over the fact of what you like to collect, right? So if you like Mickey Mantle and you want a Mickey Mantle card, then get a Mickey Mantle card based on what you like. You decide you want it raw, you want it graded, you want to get it raw, get it graded, all good. But to me, it's always, my line is always buy what you love and love what you buy. And you'll always be happy with that. Goes up, goes down. You still have that connection to that item for whatever reason you acquired it in the first place.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I have to assume that for you guys, I mean, it's not any sort of a secret. The last 5 years has been a massive boom for collectibles. What do you attribute that to? I mean, of course, you've got kind of the big macroeconomic factors of, just money kind of flowing in. But there's also big nostalgia, I feel like, too. If you look at like my YouTube audience, most of it's between 35, 55 is the age group. And it just feels like a lot of folks like me, you kind of hit midlife and you look back at your childhood, and there's frankly just a ton of different kind of those late 70s, 80s, 90s nostalgia things to take a look at. But what are your thoughts over the last 5 years? Do you have kind of like what attributed to all of that, or, a take on it?
Again, I think just a continued growing awareness of collectibles, and that it's ubiquitous. When I started here in 1985, and more so in the late 80s when it became our full-time job, and at one point it wasn't going to be. My parents, this will explain how the growth is. My parents didn't understand this. Unless you really were a collector at that time, you didn't understand this. There weren't TV shows. There weren't social media and podcasts and so forth. So it was very much a smaller community of any type of collector, whether it's cards, cast iron banks, whatever it was at the time. So while I'm working part-time at Hakes during high school, that's nice. I'm going to graduate and I say, I want to go there full-time. And they say, no, you have to get a real job. Well, so I did accounting in high school, was good at it. That was considered a real job. I went to business school, and after 2 semesters, I said, this is not for me. Mm-hmm. So that was a discussion with my parents. It did not go well. And then I moved out of the house. And many years later, we came to an understanding of it was the right decision. But at that point, it just, no one understood it. So in the late 80s, when it was my full-time job, I would carry a catalog around with me because people would say, what do you do? And if I said then I worked at a collectibles auction house, they just looked at me like, what does that mean? So I'd show them a catalog. And, if I worked at Sotheby's and sold fine art or furniture, they'd understand that. But baseball cards and comic books, it didn't resonate. So, so that was then. Now, everybody is aware. Right. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Alex. Yeah.
But just to say, while a lot of I just had a conversation with somebody today, a long-time customer and collector, old school guy, who misses the old time toy shows and things. Now that I know the National is coming up, still a big deal. I've got guys at San Diego Comic-Con, still a big deal. But the tried and true toy shows, antique shows, that's a thing of the past. And that was sort of where we would all meet and get excited and talk about that stuff. But now with shows like yours and social media, and now we're into this newer group of stuff. So Star Wars collectors, He-Man collectors, 80s G.I. Joe collectors, video game, Pokemon. Now there's an avenue of exposure. And so a lot of people in the last 5, 10, 15 years, whatever, are realizing that they can become collectors. They have many different avenues to purchase stuff. And it's not sort of a hidden thing anymore. Collecting is now worldwide. If you say you work at a collectibles auction house now, they say, wow, that's cool. How do I get a job there? Right.
Yeah.
So a totally different dynamic than it was 30 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. One thing I was just thinking about too, as you were talking, is that it feels like, if we're talking about Mickey Mantle cards, there's 20-year-olds buying Mickey Mantle cards and there's 80-year-olds buying Mickey Mantle cards. So sports cards transcend generations. But the one thing that I always thought is interesting is like when you look at Pokemon, for example, my brother, I have a younger brother that's 36 and he collected Pokemon cards. My 8-year-old also collects Pokemon cards. So we're starting to see, and then Star Wars is another very good example of kind of multiple generations that are collecting or interested in a certain IP. Whereas I don't know outside of certain things. I mean, a lot of like the toys from the 50s, they don't necessarily carry on to that next generation. Whereas if you look at kind of the IP that was built in the 70s, 80s, 90s, it's just, they just keep remaking movies. They keep remaking shows. It just seems as if it carries on. And for me, that's why I think that a lot of the pop culture collectibles starting from those eras have a bright future, just because, or maybe just a longer runway before maybe they're, transformed into something. There might be something else that takes their place, but they seem to have a longer runway, than previous generations.
I agree. And again, let's go back to my statement of love what you buy and buy what you love. There are plenty of dealers, plenty of auction houses out there that will promote the longevity and the value and the increase. And I don't have that crystal ball. I wish I did. Right. Mm-hmm. So there are things that slowly die out. Some things are generational, and then other things do have a shelf life because of the either being reinvented or just being in the public eye, right? You know who Babe Ruth is. I could mention comic characters from that era and people would say, who is that? Yellow Kid with Buster Brown, even Orphan Annie, to Dick Tracy to some degree. These are names that aren't household names anymore. Certainly Superman is, right. Mickey Mantle is, Mickey Mouse is, so there are things that will have legs for sure. But you're right. There are also, Star Wars, there's two schools of Star Wars. There's the original three movies, and then you have the things that came after that. To many generations, or to that generation, that was their first entry into the Star Wars franchise, and that's their favorite. And the first three movies, the original three movies, that's a thing of the past, right? We're talking about 40 years old now. So there are some collectors that won't collect the stuff from 77 because they want the 90s toys because that's what they remember. But yes, properties like that, personalities like that have staying power. There's always going to be fans. There's always going to be collectors. So there's things that have an indefinite shelf life, and there are certainly things that have a limited shelf life, and there are things that crash and burn, i.e. Beanie Babies. So
sure,
always beware if what you're doing is buying it for an investment versus collecting it. Just a quick story on me with that. And I've never bought anything, and I'm surrounded by stuff. Never bought anything because I said, first and foremost, this will be worth X someday. Did I think things would go up? Absolutely. But first and foremost, it was because I wanted it. In the early 90s, as I was starting to get tired of basketball cards and didn't have a great deal of disposable income, but I was a Jordan fan. And I said, I want the Fleer rookie and I want the Star 101. And I took money, hard-earned money out of the bank, and I bought both because I like Michael Jordan. Now, the secondary thought was these will be worth more someday. But as a Jordan fan, or really a Lakers fan, it's my team of any sport. If you would have told me, here's a Larry Bird card, it's going to be worth a lot more, I would say, get out of here. I don't care what it is. It's a Larry Bird card. I don't want it.
Right.
I have to have some connection to what I'm buying. And the fact that things go up, all well and good, not complaining about that, but I've got to have a connection to, and be happy to walk into this office or at my home, whatever. And every day I can look at a certain thing, remember why I bought it, when I bought it, where I bought it, have those memories. That's important to me.
No, absolutely. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. What are some of the things for people that are new to Hakes Auctions that might be watching or watch this later? What are some advantages, whether we're talking about consignments or we're talking about buying on Hakes Auctions? What are kind of some of the, I guess, a differentiator or two from Hakes that in your eyes?
Every auction house thinks they're the best, says they're the best, has a tagline, foremost, best, whatever. That's subjective. We're America's first. That's not subjective. That's truth. We started this in 1967. Ted started this in 1967. And along the way, our turnover here has been minimal. We have, not so many 38-year-old people.
I was going to say, employee retention is high there. Yeah.
38-year stints. But no, we've had people here longer than that. Like I said, Ted is still here. He comes in the office on a weekly basis. We have plenty of people that have been here 10, 15, 20 years, and they all love this stuff. So we take great pride in how we present things. We treat them like it's our item, right? This isn't a widget that we're just putting out there to sell. So when we do the photography, especially when we do the descriptions, when we now do the promotion on social media or whatever, we hope that it comes through that these items mean something to us as they do to the seller, as they will to the future buyer of them. So very, very important that, and again, not that other auction houses don't do similar things, but I take it to heart that I think we do the best job in, from start to finish, your item is going to be handled by somebody who really has an interest in them first and foremost, them as in the item and them as in the consignor.
And you had said that you have gotten more and more, or an increase in sports cards lately. Is that 2023, or just in general, you've seen more of a flush in of sports cards over the last couple of years?
Last couple of years, yeah. But again, we've always sold sports things early on, or throughout the years. Early on, it was more pinback buttons because that's what we were known for then. And just in recent years, we've had the Paul Muchinski pinback button collection, which is the best of the best, and we've gotten tremendous prices: $70,000 for Babe Ruth Red Sox and $25,000 for Mickey Mantle Fan Club. I mean, the response to that has been great. But even right before that, we had a collection called the Richard Merkin collection, and he was the foremost collector of Negro League and Cuban material, and we saw incredible prices on that. So all of that has kind of brought other sports items to us, including this time Yeah, this is one of the bigger card sections that we've ever had, primarily baseball, but we have some other sports. Yeah, I think if you're a card collector and have not heard of Hakes, and that may be because we've had a sampling of cards in the past auctions, this is the one to take notice of, because we have a pretty good selection, pre-war, post-war, across the board, lots of key cards, Hall of Famers. I mean, things that I would hope most collectors are looking for of any era.
Yeah, I selfishly pulled up this Bart Star 57 Tops. I have this in a 4 grade. This is a beautiful copy. The centering is nice. And one thing I noticed about this one is the corner. So I was looking at my 4. The surface is a little bit better. I think, at least in my mind anyway, I like the surface on my copy, but the corners on this copy are fantastic. So I understand the difference in the grade, but I always like vintage because it's always beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You know, it could,
Sure.
yeah, it's going to vary depending on what your preferences are as far as what kind of copy you're looking for. But you guys have a beautiful 7 that is up for auction. I wanted to share it.
And this is pack fresh. And when I say that, this is part of the John Grossman collection. So many of the cards from the 50s and newer, this auction, are from that collection. This was a person that in the 1950s, as a kid, mowed lawns, took that money and bought boxes of Topps cards at a local grocery store. And then not so much football, more baseball, but he would open the packs, he'd sort, and so he saved them that way over the years. So these are in incredible shape for what they are because of the source. This was a young kid that, and then he branched into non-sport as well. And then he became older and became a collector and went back and bought things that he didn't have that he was buying as a kid. So his collection spans the 30s through the 70s. This auction, we are just offering sports cards. Starting in the November auction, we will be offering some of his non-sport, which is as nice as the sports we have this time. That collection is even more incredible.
Fantastic. How does this stuff, I mean, obviously it's relationship building, but I mean, how do you even, get that? So I guess you have to just build trust over time. I assume he's worked with you guys for a long time.
A long-time person in the industry, going back to as far as not being a kid in collecting, but in the 70s is when he started his second phase of collecting. He's actually credited in the non-sport Benjamin books and was a bidder. So that's one of our calling cards too, is that we've been around so long that we have a clientele that has stuck with us. 56 years in any business is a long time. In this business, it's incredible. So we have that lineage and the trust factor there again, that we know what we're doing. If we didn't, we would have sold millions of items and been around 56 years. So yeah, even though there are still plenty of people out there who don't know who we are, we continue to try and change that narrative. I think one of the things is, when you go back to what makes Hakes different, we've always had an eclectic catalog, as you have pointed out several times.
Yes.
Or eclectic auction, I should say, and that is all in one. So because we offered so many categories early on and continue to do so, every auction, at least every one, or 3 cataloged auctions a year, are always a conglomerate of what we do. So there'll be 500 political items, there'll be a couple hundred sports items, there'll be 500 comic books, there'll be action figures.
Yeah, these are all the categories, guys.
All of those, yeah. So we sort of save the best of the best for those. Our online auctions, we tend to sometimes do more thematic, comics or political. But the reason we do that, two things. One, we have this clientele that is not a one-trick pony. We have lots of cross-interest collectors, just like myself and like you. So while somebody may be primarily a political collector, it's never surprising to see them buy a Beatles item or a comic book. We could have the same way. We could have a original art collector, but likes Kennedy, remembers that era, and maybe they don't become a Kennedy collector, but they'll buy one Kennedy item. So an advantage to our audience as a consigner is you have all of these different eyes. You have the serious collector for one category, and then you have the fringe guys that like seeing all this other stuff that at any moment could jump on one of these other items. Second part of that, though, is we also can curate each section. So again, I'm a collector. When I get a catalog of one theme and it's 1,000, 1,500 items, where do I start? You know, so with us offering smaller sections of each thing, it's less to choose from, benefits a consignor if there's not as much competition, but also the bidders then can not be as overwhelmed and maybe hone in on a few pieces they want versus looking over a lot of the same thing. You know, we also try not to do duplication. No two of the same card or same comic, or at least in the same grade. So we really factor in both the consignor in mind, that we want to maximize what we can get for them, but also for the bidder, let's not overwhelm them and let them come back wanting more the next auction we have.
How often do you guys run auctions, Alex? Is it monthly, or how do you guys normally do it? What's your cadence?
Steve, the owner of the company, would like it to be daily.
Yeah.
That's not possible. We do 3 cataloged auctions a year. Those are usually March, July, and November. So that is the current catalog. That will be 1,500 to 2,000 premier items. Oof. And then in between those, we'll do online only auctions, no catalog. There'll still be 2,000 items or so in many of the categories we offer, but those can be a little bit larger offerings. Instead of, say, 500 comics in an auction of a catalog, there's 1,000 comics, but much of the online material is, say, $500 and under. So now we open it up to collectors on a budget and collectors who want to buy more in volume and aren't so tied to how much it's going to cost them, because now they can buy 5 comics versus 1 comic.
Right. No, that makes sense. Ryan has a question here for you. Being from PA, has Hakes ever sold any original artwork from Topps, specifically Mars Attacks, National Chickle, or Bowman Gum Inc.?
We've had original card art over the years, never Mars Attacks. We did recently in an auction have a piece from the 66 Batman top set, which was a fantastic one with Batman, Robin, and Penguin, and other artwork from other cards. Yes, I'd love to have something from Mars Attacks. It hasn't happened yet, but, you know, possibly sometime. Yeah, I will say coming up maybe next auction, we are going to have in the November auction, we will have a nice graded Mars Attack set, and we also have some pre-production stuff, some printing plates and things. So not necessarily original art from Mars Attacks, but production pieces.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, I am pulling up the big monster here. The Amazing Spider-Man. Can you guys see? Did this work okay? Yes, it did. Okay. 1963, Amazing Spider-Man #1, CGC 9.6 white pages, which is insanity. Second highest graded, one of the foremost copies in the world. Yes, that is true. I think that there's only 3, if I have it right, there's only 3 of these and only 1 or 2 9.8s.
There are 5 9.6s and 2 9.8s.
2 9.8s. Okay.
Yeah, but we're talking about, and none higher than 9.8, obviously.
Right.
But we're talking about 7 copies in that small high grade range, versus nearly 5,000 copies of this book that has been graded by CGC over 2+ decades.
Yeah. How often do you see these come through, Alex? I mean, this is like the tippity top of collectibles to me, for especially pop culture stuff.
There was a 9.6 that sold the end of last year, but that did not have white pages. That was off-white to white pages. So again, you were talking about different grading companies and things. Even within a set grade, there can be variances. So to me, a 9.6 white pages is better than a 9.6 off-white pages, right? And you can have a card that looks better than another, be the same grade. Same with a comic. You could have the visual eye appeal of one comic in the same grade could be different. This has eye appeal. When we took this collection in, this was the John B. Goodrich SpiderMan collection. And we have been working on this collection for a while, and it came towards the end of putting this last auction together. Almost didn't make it in this sale, but we made sure we did, because it ended up being the premier piece on the front cover of the catalog. Also, if anybody is out there that's going to San Diego Comic-Con, our booth is set up, and this is at the booth if you want to go view it in person. So this whole collection came in Amazing Fantasy 15, first appearance of Spider-Man, and then Spider-Man 1 through 20. So the premier issues of this title, one of the premier titles of all of Marvel Comics. And it was high grade. We had no doubt about it. Now, we're not the third-party authenticator, though. So we send it off to CGC and hold our breath, because we've done this before and things have come back what's called a purple label, which means restored.
Yes.
Not good. You want universal, you want blue. So when we sent those books in, I really thought the AF-15 would be I was hoping for an 8, maybe an 8.5. And it came back a 7.5. Still solid, not complaining. This, we thought, it's a 9, it's a 9.2. Never in our wildest dreams did we think 9.6. So when we get the email of what's coming back and we see that grade, we instantly, then the first thing we do is now the research kicks in. Okay, how many 9.6s are out there? How many are out there that are better? How many have sold? So in that research, this one, like I said, just sold in the last year. You have to go back another 10 years before you find another 9.6 for sale. And there are no known auction results for 9.8. So whoever has the 2 9.8s sold privately, never at auction.
Chris is asking, is that the 52 mantle equivalent? I would say no. Would you say Action Comics 1? Is that considered, or is that like a Honus Wagner? Yeah, what would you consider?
Action 1, Detective 27, first Batman will be the Wagner. Amazing Fantasy 15, which is the first appearance of Spider-Man, which is right before this. Now you got your mantle. Yeah.
I agree. Unbelievable. And it's sitting currently at 185,000, I believe, is the current bid for that one. Let's pull up here. I'm actually selfishly bringing up a card that I want one day. It's not going to happen in this auction, but one day I will have this card. Everybody brace yourselves. It's the 93 Skybox Matt Groening Simpsons autograph card. I love this thing. So it's numbered to 400, and it's original art that came in this 93 Skybox set, numbered to 400, and it's original art on a card, which if you guys, pay attention to original comic art or original art in general now, it's gone bananas.
And throw out the one of 400 because it's nowhere near that many. This is one of if not the first official sketch card insert. But unlike most sketch cards, which are inserted, you got a redemption card. You turn that in, and Matt would then at that time do that card.
Oh, man, I didn't know that part.
Yeah, piecemeal. So imagine all the boxes that are still out there that haven't been opened. Packs that haven't been opened. People that just didn't send that card back in. I've only seen a handful of these. So I think I think it's well under 100 that ever got redeemed, if that many.
So he actually created it when you turned in the redemption.
Yep. Didn't start till you sent that card in, and then he did. I think it said it would take, I don't know, a month, couple of months. There's some lag time till you would get it back, and they were all different. I think he did different characters. The ones that I've seen have mostly been Bart, but even the cartoon balloon, word balloon was different. So they're all unique. And like I said, there's only a handful out there that I've seen. So nowhere near the 400.
Yeah, and it's got the classic. This one's the "I'm Bart Simpson, who the hell are you" line, which is kind of like, that's a classic line if you watch The Simpsons. Man, unbelievable card.
So this is from the Roxanne Tozer collection, and if anybody has done non-sport should know that name because they started a non-sport update. It's a legendary collection. We only have this and then one other lot of Simpson sketch cards this auction. But starting next auction, the same as the Grossman collection, we will be selling their non-sport cards, which are, full sets. And we're going to have some really great Topps test cards, wrappers. So in November, it's going to be not one, but two of the finest non-sport collections ever to come to auction. And it's just the beginning. Both of those could take a year or two to offer everything. They're that expansive.
Wow. Okay. Fantastic. Well, we've got I think there's about 5 days left on this one. Let's see where we are. We don't have very much longer on this particular auction. We're about 7 days left in this particular auction. And there's a ton. I know there's a lot of vintage, especially baseball card collectors that watch the channel. And there is all sorts of different things. I saw Ryan had commented earlier. What was it that you had commented? The 1908 Rose Company Yeah, the postcards and the 1929 Murderers Row White Sox stuff. There's a lot of really unique niche things in here. So very, very cool. Well, I think that we're probably going to wrap here pretty soon. Alex, I appreciate you coming on. Is there anything that you wanted to kind of throw in here at the end? Well, also, and let me also just say first, guys, go through the link in the video description. I'm also going to pin it to the comments of this video to get to Hakes Auctions. Check out all of their stuff. And like Alex said, obviously a lot of auctions running throughout the year, and there's some amazing collections that are coming out. But Alex, any final words before we
No, I just reiterate the auction closes next week in 2 parts. So the first half is Tuesday. That's all the historical, political, all the sports will be in that. And then the second half closes Wednesday. That's the comic books, the original art, the action figures, the more pop culture stuff. So it closes over 2 days. Both of those start ending at 9 o'clock Eastern. So at 9, we start a 20-minute clock. When 20 minutes pass without a bid on that particular item, it closes. So items, we don't close lot by lot, we close in waves. So make sure you start bidding before 9 Eastern on Tuesday, Wednesday. And then for future auctions, sign up for our email, follow us on any of our socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We keep that updated as collections come in, as items come in, as shows we're going to do, other events we're going to do. So once you figure out who you are, know who you are, easy to follow us. We try to keep everyone updated.
And I'll say too, guys, I mean, this is ending kind of right as the Nationals beginning next week, the National Card Show in Chicago and Rosemont. So pay attention. There's probably going to be some things there that are ending, as people are not paying attention. There could be some definitely, some deals that pop up there at the end. So, Alex, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. We will certainly do this again, hopefully soon. But guys, thank you very much. Brendan says, excellent live stream. Absolutely great guest. Awesome getting to know you, man. And we'll see everybody next time. Stay on, Alex. Don't click off quite yet.